Okay, there we go. So thank you very much, Grandma, for participating in this interview. I know my students will look forward to viewing it. So if you could just say your name.
Beverly Preston
Okay, and where do you currently live?
in Sarasota, Florida.
And where did you live during the time of World War II?
Joliet, Illinois.
And where is that? Like what major
That is
city?
about 60 miles south of Chicago.
Okay, good. That'll help us better understand. How old were you around the start of World War II?
I was 8 years old when it started, and I was 14 years old when it ended.
Perfect. So that is around the age of my students right now. So most of my kids are 13, 14 years old. So about the time World War II ended. For you, that's around the age of my kids right now. So how did you receive the news of Pearl Harbor?
It was a Sunday afternoon, and I was all ready to go with my father to the bowling alley. And we heard this noise up the street, and it was the paper boy yelling, "Extra, extra, read all about it. The Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor." And everybody ran out and bought newspapers to see what was going on. Then we went back into the house and turned on the telephone, the radio, the radio, to see what news was coming on over the radio about it.
Okay. So did you end up going bowling?
No, we didn't go bowling. Everybody was too upset to do anything that day.
So did you, being 8 years old, really understand what was happening?
No. But everybody was upset and very concerned, so I knew it wasn't good.
Okay. And you said you listened to the radio.
Yes.
So how did people receive news during this time in the 40s?
The radio. Either the newspaper or the radio. There wasn't even a thought of television back then.
Okay, so news wasn't instantaneous. Like we can receive live news feeds on our telephones, or Twitter or social media, so it was not instantaneous like.
Oh no, not
today.
at all.
Okay. And then did you or your family listen to the president's speech about
Yes.
Pearl Harbor?
Yes.
And what impact did that have on either your family or the country? Do you remember?
Well, everybody was upset, and many of the young men went down the next day and all volunteered to go to fight the war.
Did you have any family members that volunteered to serve?
I had an uncle that served on Saipan Island in the Pacific.
Okay. How did your life change after the United States entered into World War II?
Well, first off, we had rationing. So everybody was given a rationing book, and the meats and the gas and the shoes and items like that. And then everybody also planted victory gardens. And the reason for that was everything was rationed, and the food and everything needed to go to the men that were fighting the war, so we were trying to help behind. And everybody was very willing to do their part for the service.
So, what does rationing mean? So, we heard last week from another teacher that there were rationing cards, and then you brought up that things were rationed. What does that mean? What does it mean to ration something?
Well, they would give you a book, and when it had coupons in it. And if you went to the grocery store and you wanted some beef, it would depend upon what you wanted and how many of your meat coupons you'd give them. Some of your coupons were for food, some were for shoes, some were for gas. They were all different kinds of coupons. And if you wanted a big piece of meat one day, then that might have to last you for 3 or 4 days because you only had so many rationings. You'd have to give so many stamps for a different piece of meat.
So you couldn't just go out and get as much meat as you wanted that week.
No, no.
Okay, so it'd require planning and conserving.
Yes. And in those days, you didn't see many obese people. I mean, people were much trimmer. Well, they weren't as heavy to begin with as they are these days. And people really didn't gain weight and we ate a lot of vegetables.
So
I mean,
what?
we weren't starving by any means. We had enough food to get by. No one was underfed, but it was just not the same luxury items we had before.
So what were some luxury items that you would have had? So food wise or item wise?
Well, even chocolate was rationed, so you didn't get much chocolate. I can't remember. I don't think jewelry was rationed. I know shoes were rationed. I can't think of anything else in a luxury item that was rationed.
Okay. So what are some other ways that people conserved items during the war? So you talked about not being able to go out and just buy anything you wanted to buy. So you had your ration items, but you've also talked about saving things and conserving items. So what are some items that you would conserve, like cooking materials or things of that nature?
Well, for one thing, you were very careful if you had enough, if you could use some of your stamps to buy bacon, you would use the grease from the bacon, or after it was solidified, you could use that in place of butter, because butter was another thing that was rationed. Or if there was grease left over when you were cooking the meat, you had a big can on your counter normally, with a lid on it, and you put the grease in it. And then you turned, after so long, when it got full, you turned it in, because that was used for making some of the ammunition.
Okay. So you said you had a family member who fought in World War II, fought on the Pacific Front. Did you communicate with them?
Yes, we communicated by what they called V-mail, victory mail. And you wrote a letter on a small piece of paper. It was a special form. This was folded up, and you wrote it, and then you sent it off to the APO address in Washington, and then they would take and censor it, and they would photograph it. They put it on a film, and then the rolls of film, and they put 1,000 letters on a roll, and then that was airmailed, went over to the country, and to a receiving station, and there they would take and run it out, print it out in 4x5 paper, is all it was, and put it in an envelope and send it to the soldier on the front, so that they could, and then the soldier would do the same thing coming back. And the reason for that was that they didn't have the airplanes in those days like they have now, and what few they had, they were using to transport the troops back and forth and supplies back and forth. So they had to condense everything for the mail to get it back and forth.
Okay. What were women doing during this time period?
Well, before that, most women were housewives. They stayed at home. But when the war started, they all had to pitch in. They did man's jobs. They drove trucks. They worked in factories. At the time, there was a song that was even written about Rosie the Riveter, because she worked in an airplane factory and did the riveting like a man would do. But and then was an ammunition plant south of our town, and a lot of the ladies went down there and worked in the ammunition plant. So everybody worked. Everybody pitched in and did their share.
Okay. Did anything at your school change because of the war?
The schools, no, I don't. Well, I shouldn't say that. The only thing I can think of that was different, that they actually sold what they called war stamps. And the children would save their pennies and buy war stamps. And you'd get a book, and you'd paste the stamps in the book, and then as soon as you had $18 worth of stamps, you'd take them in and buy a war bond with it. Now, when you got the war bond, then it paid interest. So if you kept the war bond till it matured, I believe it was 10 years, I'm not sure on the time, the $18 became $25. So children were encouraged to save their money, and it was for the war.
Okay. Um, do you remember the end of the war?
Yes,
What
very well.
What was it like?
Everybody went downtown. It was just a mass of people mulling around all the streets, the sidewalks, and everything. Everybody was so happy, and all they could think about the fact that their husbands, their relatives, their friends, everybody would be coming home.
So it was a joyous time in the country.
Very.
So did life change because you said that women went to work? Did women continue working? Did women go back home? How did?
Well, that became a little difficult because some of them got used to working and kind of, well, to this day they still work. But a lot of the soldiers, when they came back, went to college, went back and get their education. So there were still some spots that, places that needed some women. But if their children were small, they went back to being a housewife. It pretty much life pretty much went back to normal after a while.
Okay, and then what are things that people should know about World War II that they may not know?
Well, a lot of people made a lot of sacrifices, uh, and they had flags that if your son was from a house, if you had a son or a member of your household that was in service, you had a little uh, blue flag with a star on it, and you'd hang it in the window very proudly. And sometimes there'd be three flags in a window. And if something happened to one of those members, that star changed into a gold star. It was a gold flag with a white star in the middle. And there were, when you drive up and down the street, you'd see lots of stars hanging in windows. So there were a lot of people that had sent members off to war.
Okay. Well, I appreciate you taking the time to discuss your memories with me and sharing them with my students, and I know they will appreciate it as well. So, thank you